Does American Mcgee's Alice hold up in 2025, 25 years after its initial release? Well, stick around if you're interested in hearing my answer. In my review today, I played the Xbox 360 port of this game, which is a free DLC for what is in my opinion the best horror game of all time, Alice Madness Returns, which I've discussed countless times on this channel, and I'll be reviewing the game based off other games of the late 90s / early 2000s that I've played, while also comparing it to modern gaming standards, as things have definitely changed a lot over the last 2.5 decades. Gonna start things off with some low-hanging fruit and discuss graphics. While I haven't played a ton of games from the year of our Lord 2000, this is definitely one of the better looking games I've seen from this era, and it's pretty detailed, and Alice even looks better than some modern games. Hello Golem. So, for the time, this game graphically looked great, I'd say, although technically it doesn't hold up by most modern gaming standards, although retro graphic horror games are starting to pick up in popularity. Looking at recent titles like K9 and Kiosk on PC. As far as this port, I read on Wikipedia that the only graphical difference from the original release was changing the resolution and some small tweaks with the lighting. And while I'm not sure how much of the art designs Mcgee made himself, being the gifted artist that he is, the art style for this game was really amazing, with a lot of very creative character designs. And while I haven't played it, I hope to play his game Grimm someday, which I've heard is pretty much an interactive painting made by Mcgee. Changing topics, the soundtrack was amazing, and one of the things I really loved about this game, and it truly felt like something from another world and helped build the atmosphere. The game's sound effects were decent, I guess, with both great and meh voice actors, and the gifted Susie Bran and Roger Jackson would go on to reprise their roles of Alice and Cheshire in the sequel, and their voices really stood out amongst some of the meh VAs in this game. I guess we'll discuss platforming from here. It was not very enjoyable, rather tedious at times, and had a recurring bug where I would be shimmying along the edge of something, e.g. a wall or a rock, and just couldn't climb up for whatever reason, and I just keep shimmying left and right until I finally found the exact spot required to hoist Alice up, so that did not help my platforming experience one bit, and I'm assuming it's a bug and the game wasn't designed this way, but because of how frequent I encountered this issue, it possibly could have been intentional. And putting that aside, I honestly just found the platforming to be really boring and or frustrating and or deceptively challenging at times. I can't really explain why fully, but I just didn't enjoy it. Does the platforming hold up by modern standards? Not exactly, with my biggest reasons for saying this being the recurring shimmy issue and the overall clunkiness of said platforming. But to be fair, a lot of games from this time era are clunky compared to modern games. Okay, on to combat. One of the biggest notable differences from the second game was that there isn't hysteria, which Alice can activate upon the brink of insanity/death, which makes her invincible and she deals hyper damage for a few seconds. This game has rage drops, which increases her damage and slightly reduces stamina required for ranged attacks. They really weren't that useful, as they were rare and almost always in areas where they were unhelpful, like being 10 seconds away from any enemies, and the power-up would often wear off by the time you actually found an opponent. A good idea with poor execution, and I definitely prefer hysteria. But the combat itself was definitely dated, and like a lot of games from this time era, rather clunky, and melee weapons often felt pointless, as they weren't very effective, and it was pretty much always better to just use ranged attacks unless you absolutely had to go hand to hand after running out of stamina. Why? That's just the way the game was, really. Can't say it made sense to be honest, and while sure, this game has a pretty decent weapon variety, only 2 or 3 of them were really that useful. Weapons were divided into 2 categories, I guess. Ranged and weapons with ranged and melee attacks. We'll start with the latter, I guess. You had the Vorpal Blade, with almost no range, weak melee damage, although when thrown it deals a fair amount of pain, but takes a while to return to Alice, leaving her vulnerable. Next was the Croquette Bat, which can be swung like a stick or used to hit balls at enemies. And that was it for melee weapons. Onto strictly ranged weapons, you had playing cards, which deal weak damage when thrown, or you can throw several at a time for a blast of higher damage. And I should note that all ranged attacks drained Alice's stamina, except for throwing the Vorpal Blade, I think. You also had dice, which did something. They seemed to create smoke clouds and weren't really effective. At least that was my experience. I did some looking into it, and they don't do anything if not properly thrown or if an enemy steps on them. But if thrown properly, will summon monsters to aid Alice, but they can turn and attack her, so risky to use. You also had the Jacks, which did decent damage actually, and could hit multiple enemies at once, so that was nice. Next on the list is my favorite weapon, the Ice Staff, which froze enemies to death and had a secondary fire which could create a shield of ice in front of Alice, although it was seldom helpful. Pause here for a second. I wonder if Skylander Giants piggybacked on this idea, as the character Chill could also create an ice shield, except hers was more effective. Just a thought. Another weapon you had was the Jack-in-the-Box. Pretty useful for boss fights. It spewed out fire in a circle around where it was thrown and dealt pretty fair damage, although it took a second to activate and could catch Alice on fire if you weren't careful. And finally, you had the Jabberwock Staff, which I didn't acquire until after most of my recording. That thing was a massive disappointment. It was hyped as a super powerful weapon, and you went on a huge quest to collect all the pieces for it, and it sucks. It has 2 attacks, one where it can shoot a beam of energy that you can direct, and another where you launch bouncy balls of energy that just go haywire in their released area. Okay, doesn't sound too bad, except a couple things. 1, it heavily drains your stamina. 2, you have to charge it, which takes forever and leaves Alice extremely vulnerable. 3, you cannot move while using the beam attack, again leaving Alice very vulnerable. And 4, the bouncy ball energy attack can damage Alice if caution isn't used, and sometimes could hurt Alice more than her foes. And I was like, this is it? This is supposed to be the weapon I use to defeat the final boss? It stinks. Almost like the Wonder Waff on World at War's Doritos. Sure, it's a powerful weapon, but it's going to lead to your death sooner or later, and it's truly too dangerous to use. So that's all of Alice's weapons. She did also have a watch, which could stop time for several seconds, but it doesn't affect bosses, and you can't attack enemies while it's active, and sometimes it just wouldn't work at all, so bummer. And there was also a mirror power-up, which made Alice invisible for several seconds. Woohoo! This is a case of a game having a large weapon variety, but only a couple of them are actually useful, and most weapons just feel pointless. So by modern and release standards, I'd say this is a minus. Now, I did mention stamina several times, and that it's drained upon using ranged attacks. You can gain more by collecting drops, and it also slowly regenerates over time. Before we move on from discussing weapons, I will note one thing I don't hold against the game too much, and that is how it takes forever to cycle your weapons, as you have to use the bumpers. I'm assuming on PC the weapons were binded to number keys, so you could quickly swap your item, but this didn't port too well over to console sadly. But to be fair, I'm not really sure how else they could have fixed this, except for maybe binding weapons to the D-pad, so I don't hold this against the game, I just wish a better solution could have been found. In a similar topic to weapons, this game has a huge variety of enemies, and I'm not sure I even remember them all. There were a couple variants of card enemies, the only enemies who made it to the sequel, I think, chess pieces on a couple levels, the super annoying screamers who could blow you off platforms and send you plummeting to your death, lava monsters who were a pain, underwater piranhas who had a huge advantage as you could only use the knife while submerged, but overall a decent variant of enemies, along with several bosses, versus only one boss in the sequel. You fought the Duchess, the Mad Hatter, a centipede boss, and I admittedly got stuck on the Jabberwock boss before I called it quits and threw in the towel on this game. Being totally honest, I found the combat to largely be boring outside of boss fights, and then got stuck on one of said bosses. So, does combat hold up by modern standards? Really, I don't think so. It's rather stiff and is often just limited to one or two weapons realistically, and is just, well, boring to me, but I guess it's alright by 90s/2000 standards. Now, before someone says, oh, you're being too harsh on the game, I would like you to keep in mind that McGee publicly stated in page 8 of The Art of Alice Madness Returns that he didn't think this game would sell well, and that EA didn't think it would sell well either, being one of the reasons EA let it receive a M rating, and McGee said everyone was surprised by how many units were sold, kind of implying that McGee himself, the lead on this game, didn't think a lot of people would enjoy it. Discussing the story, well, this is a toughie. A quick note, I looked on Wikipedia for the last bits of the story after the Jabberwock boss. The story of Alice is good, sure, but Madness Returns kinda rewrote some things and felt more like a back burner thing than a main focus in the first game, versus being a core foundation of the sequel and one of the main selling points in my opinion. So with all this being said, does American Mcgee's Alice hold up in 2025 compared to modern gaming standards? Not really, if I'm being honest. Now, that doesn't mean it's a bad game. I just don't think it's fully stood the test of time, and its time has come and gone. But I would love, and I mean love, to see a true-to-source remake that updated the overall clunkiness of this title and made things more fluid, and maybe made combat more like that of the sequel, and of course upgraded visuals. Truly a shame we'll probably never see Alice Asylum, or at least the way McGee intended it, because EA sucks. One thing I would like to note is that I had some save issues with the game, and save slots 5 and 6 I saved at a couple places where I wanted to go back to and get some footage of, but when I went to load said saves to start recording, they were just gone, with save slots 1 through 4 being fine. I can't say this did the game any favors, having your saves just disappear. But moving on to a positive, this game was very creative in general, with one of the things I want to record being a section where you have to play as chess pieces and have to navigate them around traps, which was very fun. But yeah, so long save slot number 5. Now, for my final grade, looking at the game by itself, honestly, I think I personally give this game maybe a 7.1 out of 10. It's decent in my opinion, and that's it really, but I very likely would have enjoyed it more if I was older and grew up with more titles from this era. But with everything said in my video today, if you own Alice Madness Returns on Xbox or PlayStation, rip the PC port, give this game a spin as it's a free DLC. Worst case scenario, you lose a couple hours of your time and earn some gamer score/trophies. Not much can really go wrong there. Well, that is all from me for today. I have a feeling this video will likely get a lot of dislikes, but hey, I'm just being honest. And again, I think Madness Returns is the best horror game of all time in my opinion. Anyways, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and sorry to anyone I ticked off. And for anyone new to my channel, I mostly play, review, and discuss zombie and horror games, so feel free to maybe check out some of my other content if that possibly sounds interesting. Always remember that God loves you all very much. Hope everyone has a blessed day. Peace.